We're going to do a mandala rock with the dots in a circle. And the first thing you want to do is you want to choose your color palette. So here I've chosen, we're going to do teals and light greens. You always want to have a contrast color. So here I chose white. You could also do like a vanilla or even a really, really pale green or a super, super pale blue. But here I wanted to keep it, I like to use white as the contrast. I usually just shake the paint and get it in the, just to get it in the lid. That's all you need with the dots. It does not take much paint whatsoever to do that. So here's the colors that I'm going to use. I already have my rock painted black because that's the background color I want it to be. And I have a little trick to making sure that the rocks itself, or the dots themselves, are always in a circle. So let me lay my phone up here. Okay. So my trick is a compass. So I take my rock and I find where I want my circle to be. And how I have this paper towel underneath here. You can use a index card or a piece of paper or anything like that. You just kind of want to, before you mark it, just make sure that ever how wide you want your circle to be, that it's going to be on the top part of the rock. Doesn't mean that you can't make your dots go further out than that, but you'll see what I mean why I put this piece of paper under here. It's just a lot easier, especially because I just have this cheapo thing here. And, you know, the compass can't poke through the rock, so it's just easier to drag. Oop. And it's easy, just set your pencil on here, set it back in the middle, and drag. There. If you turn this, it's easy. Turn the napkin. It's a lot easier than trying to turn your rock. So there's that. So now take the piercing end of your compass and set it on the edge of your line, and take your pencil part and make just one little mark. So you have that right in the middle of your rock, or in the middle of your circle, so you know where that's at. So I am going to have to move over here because I'm right-handed. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is you want to mark out your dots. So I like to use, because I don't use traditional dotting tools, this is it's a stylus, the old school ones that you use on your cell phone. It's got a nice silicone head on it, so you can see where it's soft and it bends. Cleans off super easy. All you have to do is actually just wipe it on the paper towel and it comes right off. I like it because depending on the pressure, you can make your dot really wide or you can make your dot really small. So I'm going to make my initial dots. I'm going to make them white. So I will place a dot into the middle, and as I put more pressure down, you'll see it gets really big. So there's my initial dot. So now I am going to take my little tool here. I'm going to wipe it off over here first. I don't want to put a lot of paint on it because I want my outside dots to be just a little bit smaller. So here's, I put the paint, I dipped into my lid here. And so now we'll kind of mark it out like a clock. And as you can see, I'm just putting a little bit of pressure. You can also do this with the end of a pencil, an eraser. You can do it with a stick pin. That one didn't quite come out round, so it's super easy to fix. There we go. Okay. So now you want to kind of figure out how many dots that you can fit in between the two, because you want it to be even on all sides. So I think we'll do 1, 2, 3, and 4. They're pretty evenly spaced out, so you just want to continue to go with that. 1, 2, 3, 4. In turning the paper towel, it's there's a method to that madness. It saves you from having to keep picking up your rock and turning it around, which as you start adding more dots, you'll figure out exactly why I do that, because then you end up touching a dot and it smears into another dot, and then you have to paint your whole rock black and start all over again. And you don't want to do that. It does take a little bit of patience and timing to do, or time to do it, but it's not a huge thing. So once you get them on there, you can determine which ones you think need to be a little bit bigger, which ones need to, so that you can kind of even out the symmetry across the board here. They don't have to be perfect. That's why it is a homemade craft. Okay, so now I'm going to wipe my little dotter off. Now this is an even older school stylus that used to, like, for the old blackberries. I'm going to use that for a little bit smaller dots. I'm going to move into my darker teal. You don't want to try to put any dots on top of other dots until they have completely dried. That is the biggest mistake you can make with a mandala rock. So we're going to do the same thing. You always want to, when you're going in a circle, when you're going to make a full circle and you're not using, oops, I guess we're going to make these a little bit bigger. You always want to make sure that you use a tool that's a little bit rounded on the end when you're making little dots, so that it releases the paint onto the rock. So we're just going to put 2 in between each one of these. You kind of have to scoop up your paint a little bit. Sometimes you have to dip between each dot, especially when you run it into your hand. Okay, so that's one of our outside rings. So now I'm going to move into just starting to make a little bit of an outside or an inner ring with these big white dots. So you just kind of, you want to stay as in between as you can. So now I'm going to change it up a little bit. I'm going to take my darker green and I'm going to come back to my soft tip dotter here, and I'm going to make some medium sized dots here. And if one touches another one, you know, it's not a horrible thing. If you want to be a super perfectionist about it, you can always go back and paint over that one with black. And then, but you have to wait for that black to dry before you put your next dot down. I do find that resting my pinky up against the rock helps, but you know, I have shaky hands these days, so that's just me. Oops. Yeah, well, there we go. Okay. And this one I think needs a bit more. Okay. And sometimes, you know, when it's a little bit off like this one is, it's, once you get all the other dots on there, you're not going to really see it. So taking that same color green, I'm going to start a little bit of a pattern. I'm going to do a dot and 1, 2, 3. So we have that. And you're going to go. You always just want to make sure that your counts are the same. And how the dots get smaller as they go out because there's less paint on your dotter. So you just want to make sure that you always do it the same. Some people like to do puzzles. I actually find doing the mandala rocks pretty relaxing, especially if you're in a nice quiet area. Okay, so there is our outer pattern, just for this color. So now I'm going to bring in my light green, and I'm going to make a dot between each one of my dark greens. And there's no rhyme or reason to going inside to outside, outside to inside. But you always do want to kind of make sure that you set up a pattern and you continue that pattern throughout the whole project. Because if you don't, you're going to end up with a bunch of chaos. Okay, so now I am going to take my light teal and I'm going to take my silicone again and I'm going to make I'm just going to make some dots going around this one. I'm not particularly concerned about I'm doing one skip, one skip, one skip, and what I'm skipping are the spaces between the smaller holes here, or smaller gaps there in between that light green. So I'm going to skip this one and do that one, skip that one and do that one. Fix that. Skip and do. And then you see how that evened itself out there. This one looks a little small. Okay. All right, and I wiped off my silicone. So now we're going to start filling in our gaps. So I'm going to go back to that same light blue that I just used to make those dots, and I am going to fill in on top of my line. If you don't fill in this line, after it completely dries, you can actually take a pencil eraser and gently go over it, and it'll come right off. Then that way you don't have to try to paint black in there to get it off of there. Because that can be tragic. But do make sure you either cover it up or you remove it with a pencil eraser, because once you shoot clear onto it, it will intensify the pencil line. Okay, so now I've got my dots in the middles. So now I am going to take it one step further with this color, and in between all of these little guys that we did here, I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Notice that it's only one dip. Oops. Put it where you can see it. Only one dip so that the dots get smaller as you go out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Your rock never doesn't have to be a perfect circle. Like this one, as you can see, it's oblong. It's not even close to being a circle. I like the ones that are kind of on an angle a little bit like this one, just because if you use it like a paperweight or something, you can see more of the image that you have on your rock. See, right now is when that paper towel or index card comes in super handy, because if you touch that rock, you can see the dots drag around the edge. You're going to end up with them on your fingers. You're going to touch the rock. You're going to end up with a mess. Okay. So now it's pretty handy if you have a small fan that you can have going when you're doing it, so that it dries it quickly, so that you can start putting dots on top of dots. Let me see if I can aim mine over here real quick. The only thing is, you want to keep something blocking your paint so that it's not drying out your paint in the pots as you go along. I'm just going to face it this way a little bit while that does its little thing. Or not. I will. Okay, so now I am going to take my really light green, and I'm just going to start deciding how I want to fill in these little gaps here that are in between the other. This is where personal creativity comes in. You can start filling in the gaps ever how you want as you go along. Mandala it's busy. So you, as full as you can get it without it being completely overwhelming. That's kind of how you want it to be. Okay, so there's those. So now my little blue dots are not quite dry yet, but because I'm trying to dry this up, my middle dot is completely dry. So now I'm going to take my light green and I'm going to center it up, and I'm going to give it a splash of a color in there. Alright. And now I'm going to get my white, and I'm going to put some dots in here. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Oh, let me see what I just did. So now I have to decide if I want to keep that there. Actually, I kind of like that there. So I'm going to go through. I'm going to fill all of those spots in like that. There we go. So, and then I put one too many over there. So I have some black over here, and this is how we're going to fix that. I put some black on the end of my little thing here. and I want to remove that one. That's how you get rid of that. Okay, so now we are, all right, all my little things are pretty dry. I'm going to turn my fan off just because I don't want it to dry out everything. Okay, so now we're going to start bringing in some other color here. I'm going to take my darker teal, and I'm going to take kind of big scoops. I'm going to add it to the middles of these. Another tool that I do use is Sharpie markers that have become dried out, or especially the fine tip ones. I like to use those for tiny little dots. I'll be using one of those at the end because I like to use that for my final dotting. Okay, so now you can see how we have that that illusion of it's raised up a little bit. And so now I'm going to do the reverse. I'm going to use a lighter color for the middles of my teals here. I'm going to use that light spring green. Okay. So now in the whites that I have out here, the outer ring, I'm going to use the lighter teal color. And I'm actually gonna make those. They kind of look like blue egg yolks. It's funny, it's not very quiet in my painting room today. They're putting a roof on the house across the street from me. Surprised my dog's not going absolutely bananas. Oh. There. Okay. So now that we've got all of those, and now my green that's in the center here is dry. So I'm going to take a scoop of my teal here. And dot that in the middle. Okay. So now that we've got all of those, here is where my Sharpie pen, it's completely dried out years ago. But I like these because it has a nice little felt tip on the end of it that holds a little bit of paint when you put it on there. But you can see how fine it is. The dots they make are really tiny. So I'm going to take my white because it's a fabulous contrasting color. You want to use little lighter colors when you do the smaller dots like this. So you can see how little these are. Really, really little. You can also use, if you want to do super, super fine dots, you can use the tips of straight pins or stick pins to do them. Just it's so easy to accidentally drag it and ruin a dot. That's why I don't really suggest it. Paint pens they're good, but they're not consistent. Anybody who's ever used a paint pen, you know that as it starts drying out, I mean, you have to stop and you have to shake it, and sometimes the tip of the pen loses its shape, and you know, all that fun stuff. And actually, I see a little thing here that's kind of bugging me on this dot right here. So I just wiped off my Sharpie marker, or my Sharpie dotter, and I'm gonna just fix that little guy right up there. And this little guy's kind of bugging me a little bit too, so we're just going to color him in all together. And as soon as he dries, I will go back and I will fix him. Okay, so now I am going to take my darker green and I'm going to just touch just on top of that lighter green, just so that it gives it like a little bit of a bubble effect. You just want a tiny, tiny dot. I'm sure you can see my hand shaking away over here. Okay, so there's those. Now these dots that we have that are right here, that are on the outside, I'm going to take that same green and I am going to put a little dot on each one. Oh, maybe a little bigger than this. Just to draw them up a little bit. That one's a little tiny. There we go. Okay, so now we have all of those. And now I'm just going to take my white and I'm going to make a tiny dot in between each one of these green ones just to fill in some of that dead space there. And at this point, this is when you have to just be really careful not to rest your fingers or your hands or anything on top of your rock because everything's wet. And one little smudge will ruin the entire thing. And those are all filled in. Okay. Now for the sake of, I don't want to get it too outrageous because then it can just start looking like a blob. I'm just going to leave it as it is. I'm just going to make sure that I put my little white dot back in here. Right there. And that is a mandala rock. Your biggest concern should always just be that you're starting out with a perfect circle around the outside and knowing exactly where your middle is at. If you don't have that perfect circle around the outside in an exact middle, the rock will never, it will never turn out. You can do straight line mandala where you fan your dots out. If you do that, it's really cool if you take your big dot and make them out to small dots and then start with a big dot and come back into a smaller dot. Just gives it some dimension. And as I'm looking here, I'm trying to decide. It just seems like there's something I want to do, but I'm not really sure. Actually, I think I want to take my light green. And I think I want to put dots here. Just because these look really dark. I like fresh, bright colors. And my one dot on the bottom here I see looks like it's pretty wet still. And for the first time you do it, I don't suggest trying to paint over a wet dot. But if you must, when you put it on, there, you got to give it just a teensy little swish to get the paint to set inside of the other bubble of paint. So now I'm just going to leave it like it is. And we are all finished. So there's a mandala rock. I would probably call this one a peacock. But it's pretty easy. Again, start with a perfect circle, mark out your dead center, and go from there. That's the basics of it. And always stay in perfect numbers. That's all.